of their own transport system. That's for them, and they are held to account by councillors at Edinburgh City Council and the public. I do want to emphasise that the second Strategic Transport Project Review is quite specific about the needs of a cross-region mass transit system, and that's what we're anticipating will be developed. I would point out, however, in relation to trams, 11,000 responses were submitted during the consultation period. It closed on the 17th of November, and that consultation will inform the development of a strategic business case for the expansion of the tram network, which we presented to the Edinburgh City Council's Transport Environment Committee in 2026, and that's the appropriate course.
Question number 6, Martin Whitfield.
Presiding Officer, now draw attention to my declaration of interest as a former teacher to ask the Scottish Government, in the light of an increase of 63 full-time equivalent teachers in 2025 compared with the previous year, how it will fulfil its commitment to recruit 3,500 new teachers before the end of the current parliamentary session. Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has been clear that teacher numbers not only support the profession but also lead to improved outcomes for pupils. Since 2014, teacher numbers have increased by more than 2,500 as a result of investment from the Scottish Government. We provided extra funding in last year's budget, which uplifted the ring-fence funding for teacher numbers to £186.5 million. As a result of the increased funding to protect teacher numbers, this year's census data shows an overall increase in the number of teachers for the first time since 2022. And Scotland's pupil-teacher ratio also improved to 13.2, remaining by far the lowest in the United Kingdom.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful for that response. So the commitment will not be kept?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, there's an awful lot of good news in Scottish education in 2025. Teacher numbers have increased for the first time since 2022, thanks to direct investment.
Let's hear the Cabinet Secretary.
Well, teacher numbers have increased for the first time since 2022, thanks to investment from this government and, of course, through the budget, which I remember that Scottish Labour were unable to bring themselves to vote for. The attainment gap for primary pupils...
Thank you, members.
The attainment gap for primary pupils in literacy and numeracy has reduced to its lowest level on record. Class sizes have reduced in our primary schools. Attendance is improving. Nearly all 3- and 4-year-olds are in receipt of 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare. That's saving families up to £6,000 a year. This government's investments are improving outcomes for Scotland's young people. What a pity that even at Christmas time, the Labour Party cannot bring itself to celebrate this progress.
Thank you. Question number 7, Miles Briggs.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service's public consultation on the proposed closure of Marianville Fire Station in Edinburgh.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Fire Rescue Service completed a public consultation on its service delivery review, and an analysis of responses is currently being conducted. I think it's really important to stress this analysis is independent of both the Scottish Government and the SFRS, and will inform the final decisions to be taken by the SFRS board in 2026. The purpose of the review is to better align resources to current risks, and SFRS plans to redeploy resources freed up by any changes that they make to provide a greater resource to its prevention and protection function, and to boost training provision to ensure firefighters remain fully ready and competent to keep communities safe from the changing risks that they need to respond to, and to invest in fire stations which need it the most.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but I would put on record there is overwhelming public and cross-party opposition to this fire station being closed. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have acknowledged that this closure will lead to slower response times, an extra 4 to 6 minutes for residents in the north east of the city. Can I ask the Minister, once that reports, if she would agree to meet with a cross-party delegation and local residents as well to understand the real concern there is across Edinburgh at the closure of this fire station, and for government to understand that and also to take on board this public feeling?
Minister.
Thank you. The emergencies that SFRS responds to have changed significantly over the years. For example, dwelling fires have reduced by over 20% since 2013. The SFRS Chief Officer would not make changes to operations that would put the public at an unacceptable level of risk. SFRS are the experts, not us as politicians, and we should allow them to take decisions on how the service should best be configured.
Thank you. Question number 8, Alec Crowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government, in light of the ongoing reduction to both provision and facilities at the Elmwood campus of Scotland's Rural College in Cooper, what its position is on the future of the college's base in the North East Fife constituency.
Minister Ben McPherson.
SRUC's Elmwood campus continues to provide an important role in delivering further and higher education in Cooper. While SRUC is an autonomous institution with responsibility for its own decisions in relation to provision and facilities at Elmwood, I would expect SRUC to take into account the needs of students, staff and the wider community. In line with its statutory responsibilities, the Scottish Funding Council will continue to offer appropriate support to further and higher education institutions, including SRUC, as they develop their own plans.
Alec Crowley.
Presiding Officer, since the Rural College took over the Elmwood campus, courses and facilities have been gutted. People in the area, there has been a college in North East Fife since 1953. Will the Minister agree to meet with the local groups that have formed together, because they are so concerned that they believe there is no future if the Rural College is allowed to continue to strip its assets and reduce the number of courses that are available? Will he meet with the local group?
Minister.
I would be happy to engage with the member and look to take up that correspondence if he can help facilitate that. I did have a good meeting in recent weeks with SRUC as well. I am aware that SRUC's decision earlier this year to close its main building at Elmwood due to concerns about structural deterioration and long-term financial viability have raised questions. However, SRUC provides an important role for further and higher education students in Cooper. We're very aware of that. Therefore, it is welcome that it has stated its commitment to retaining a presence in Elmwood and that there are no plans for closure of the campus. And SRUC have also advised that its animal care provision will remain on offer at its other campuses, while horticulture and gamekeeping provision will remain on offer at Elmwood.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay at question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On September the 16th, the Justice Secretary misrepresented Professor Alexis Jay to justify the SNP's opposition to a grooming gangs inquiry. For months, in public and in Parliament, she denied any wrongdoing. But we now know that Angela Constance apologised to Professor Jay on the 1st of December. She knew that she was wrong all along, but she tried to get away with it. Yesterday, a full 9 weeks later, Angela Constance was forced to finally come clean. Does John Swinney believe that Angela Constance tried to correct the record at the earliest possible opportunity?
First Minister.
I think the events of the last few weeks and months demonstrate that Angela Constance has set out to Parliament the position of the Government, and where there has been a necessity for further information to be provided, she has done exactly that. And the Justice Secretary spent the best part of 2 hours yesterday at committee explaining all of these issues and addressing the very issues that Mr Finlay is putting to me this morning.
Russell Finlay.
The information has been dragged out of the Justice Secretary. Paragraph 1.7 of the Ministerial Code is crystal clear, and I'll read it out for John Swinney's benefit. It states that ministers must give, and I quote, accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Angela Constance blatantly and brazenly decided not to correct the record at the earliest possible opportunity. How can John Swinney pretend to himself and to the public that Angela Constance has not breached the Ministerial Code?
First Minister.
As I've said on a number of occasions to Parliament, Angela Constance was making a general observation drawing on the remarks of Professor Alexis Jay back in September. And having looked at the issue and looked at all of the material, I'm content there's been no breach of the Ministerial Code.
Russell Finlay.
Professor Jay told the Scottish Parliament that she'd been misrepresented on September the 26th. Now that was Angela Constance's earliest opportunity to correct the record. She could have corrected the record. She should have corrected the record in September, October, November and December. She should have corrected the record when we challenged her in 3 urgent questions, 2 ministerial statements, 2 First Minister's questions and a motion of no confidence. She should have corrected the record after being repeatedly challenged by grooming gang victims and by journalists. 3 months have passed, and only now is Angela Constance trying to correct the record. She didn't correct the record at the earliest opportunity, as required under the Ministerial Code. So how on earth can John Swinney continue to defend his disgraced Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
As I've said to Parliament before, and as I said to Parliament on Tuesday when this issue was debated and Parliament expressed its confidence in the Justice Secretary, people will take different conclusions from the words that we use in Parliament. What the Justice Secretary is trying to do, is to address the concerns that have been set out, and to do that in a comprehensive and open way, as she did with the committee yesterday.
Let's hear one another. Those who are in the gallery would like to hear.
And I'm satisfied with the steps that have been taken to deal with this matter.
Russell Finlay.
This scandal, and it is a scandal, it shows the very worst of the SNP.
It does.
Cynical and calculating, dishonest and devious.
Exactly.
A government that always chooses short-term political fixes and convenience. Never about what's doing right for victims, always about what's doing right for the SNP. Angela Constance's evidence to the Education Committee yesterday was shambolic and indefensible. The Justice Secretary has confirmed beyond any doubt whatsoever that she broke the Ministerial Code by refusing to admit her mistake at the earliest opportunity. Angela Constance misled the public, Parliament and grooming gang victims. So what on earth does it take for John Swinney to sack any of his ministers?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay used some pretty strong language in his question there. He talked about cynical, calculating and dishonest. And what I want to say to Mr Finlay is the amendment that was put forward by Liam Kerr in the Victims and Witnesses Bill and the actions of the Conservative Party after that was defeated were actions that were cynical, calculating and dishonest. Because Mr Finlay knows full well that the amendment that was put forward by Liam Kerr would not have delivered a grooming gangs inquiry. It would have delivered none of the action that the Scottish Government is now taking, whether that's the actions of the 4 independent inspectorates or whether it's the actions of Police Scotland or the work of the National Childhood Sexual Abuse Panel. What Mr Finlay and his colleagues were putting forward, how they behaved around that circumstance.
First Minister, it's really important that each and every member in here has an opportunity to speak when called to do so. And I would ask members to treat one another with courtesy and respect.
Simply say to Mr Finlay that the proposition that was put forward by his colleague in September had no effect whatsoever in delivering a grooming inquiry. That will not deliver for the victims who have suffered sexual abuse. This government is taking the practical action to do it, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. I would remind members that many members have an interest in putting a question today, and that will be more likely if we can proceed and hear one another. At question number 2, I call Anna Sarwar.
Before I turn to my questions, may I wish you, colleagues across the Chamber and all parliamentary staff a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And can I offer my sincere thanks to the emergency service workers who will be working throughout the festive period to keep us all safe. Presiding Officer, Scotland is in a housing emergency. John Swinney has admitted that himself. But to declare a housing emergency and do nothing isn't leadership, it's yet another cowardly stunt. The number of people sleeping rough is at its highest point in 14 years. Over 17,000 households are in temporary accommodation, the highest on record. This is the result of 18 years of SNP government. So let us be clear about what's going on. At the very moment demand is rising, supply is falling. At the very moment families need security, the system is delivering instability. And at the very moment government says it understands the scale of the crisis, social care house building has fallen to its lowest level on record. So can John Swinney explain how that represents progress or competence or anything resembling a response to the housing emergency he admits Scotland is facing under this SNP government?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me join Mr Sarwar in extending my good wishes to you and to parliamentary colleagues at Christmas time, and to wish everyone a happy Christmas and a happy New Year, and express my thanks to the emergency services, who I will have much to do with in the course of the next few days and weeks, for the service that they are giving to the public over this period. I acknowledge there is a housing emergency. That's what the government has accepted, and that's why the Housing Secretary, Mary McCallan, has set out the Housing Action Plan. We have taken steps. Mr Sarwar said that the government was doing nothing about this. Well, the government has taken one really significant action in my time as First Minister, and that has been to dramatically increase the resources available for new house building in Scotland. So, on my watch as First Minister, housing has been given more money than it has ever had before to increase the supply of housing. And of course that builds on the fact that over the lifetime of this government, we have helped to deliver more than 141,000 affordable homes, and over 101,000 of those have been available for social rent. That's 45% more per head of population than in England, and 69% more than in Wales. So at a time when we've all been wrestling with public spending challenges over that period, this government has delivered more new affordable housing than has been delivered in England or in Wales, and we're building on that record with a budget settlement that will deliver for housing in Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, John Swinney should be ashamed of the SNP's record on housing and the damage it's doing. And to prove it, your constituents, I would remind members on the SNP benches, today there are 10,000 children across Scotland living in temporary accommodation. 10,000 children. Flats, hotels, B&Bs and hostels. Some of these families have been moved from place to place more than a dozen times, never settling, never unpacking, never knowing where they'll be next, years without a home.
Sorry, Mr Sarwar, I cannot hear you for Mr Johnson. Please desist. Mr Sarwar, continue.
So never settling, never unpacking, never knowing where they will be next, years without a home. In Glasgow, one family has spent 13 years in temporary accommodation. In Edinburgh, one family has spent 9 years in temporary accommodation. That is an entire childhood, year after year, spent moving place to place and school to school, Christmas after Christmas, without a home to call their own. So how many Christmases must a child spend without a home before John Swinney admits that his SNP government has utterly failed?
First Minister.
Well, what the government is doing, as I said in my earlier answer, is increasing the investment that's available for housing. And one of the things that we have taken forward has been to invest more in supporting the transfer of accommodation from void properties into accommodation in use. So, in the last financial year, we increased. In previous financial year, we put £40 million into that effort. This year, we've doubled it to £80 million. And in 2024-25 alone, there were 2,066 houses taken out of being void properties into use as houses that can be used by families in these circumstances. Now, what we're also doing, and what we see in the data that was published earlier on this week, with the increased budget the government is putting in place, there has been a 61% increase in the last quarter in the number of approvals for affordable housing, and that's resulted in an 18% increase in the number of starts in the July to September period. So the investment that the government has put in place is now having an effect on boosting those numbers, but fundamentally we have been building more houses in Scotland per head of population than has been the case in other parts of the United Kingdom as we wrestle with the public finance challenges that we all face.
Anna Sarwar.
That's the best answer the First Minister's got to 10,000 children being homeless and families being in temporary accommodation for up to 13 years. Utterly shameful and embarrassing, because the truth is John Swinney cannot defend his record when it comes to failing Scotland's children. 10,000 children without a home to call their own this Christmas. And this is the man that downgraded the results of working-class kids during the pandemic. 4,310 fewer teachers in Scotland than the SNP promised at the last election. Slashed college budgets, violence in our schools on the rise. More than a third of young people who ask for help with their mental health rejected by the NHS, and a Justice Secretary who hunts for excuses to not have an inquiry into child sexual exploitation. Failure is no longer the exception for this SNP government, it is the rule. Things are getting not better on his watch for Scotland's children, they are getting worse. And it is the most vulnerable who are paying the highest price. So why are the SNP and John Swinney so comfortable in failing Scotland's children?
First Minister.
Well, I'll tell Mr Sarwar what is shameful and embarrassing. It's him coming here every day moaning about things and not prepared to vote for a budget that will increase investment in our public services. That is what is shameful and embarrassing, and Mr Sarwar should think twice about it. Now, when he wants to raise my record about supporting children in Scotland, the Education Secretary was on her feet in Parliament on Tuesday, setting out record levels of literacy and numeracy in our schools, attendance rising in our schools, teacher numbers rising in our schools, the attainment gap narrowing in Scotland yet further. And I'm proud of the fact that on my watch, child poverty in Scotland is falling and is at the lowest level in 30 years.
Thank you.
And if Mr Sarwar wants to know how he's getting on, he might want to have a look at some of the substance of the Ipsos Mori polling last week. Because when the public in Scotland were asked, who do you trust most to manage education and schools in Scotland, trust in the SNP was rising and trust in the Labour Party was falling. So the Labour Party is making absolutely no progress. And if he thinks it's just education, it's also on health. Trust in the Labour Party to solve the issues in the health service falling, trust in the SNP rising. Why? Because waiting lists are going down, waiting times are going down, GP numbers are going up, because we're delivering on the National Health Service.
Thank you. Thank you. At question number 3, I call Ross Greer.
Thank you. Can I start by wishing all colleagues Merry Christmas and joining the First Minister and Anas Sarwar in thanking our emergency services and all other key workers who will keep the country going over the festive period. A month ago, Exxon announced that they were closing their Mossmoran site in Fife. Over 400 workers face an imminent redundancy. I've repeatedly asked the First Minister for the Just Transition Plan that his government committed to produce 18 months ago for Mossmoran. Freedom of Information requests submitted by the Scottish Greens returned only a single document from before last month's announcement, a speech given by a minister in response to a debate organised by Fife's Green MSP, Mark Ruskell, and that was before the commitment to the transition plan was even made. It's absolutely clear that no work was done. So 18 months on from the Scottish Government saying they would come up with a plan, and a month after Exxon announced the site's closure, these workers are going into Christmas knowing they will lose their jobs in the new year. Mossmoran's workers need jobs to go into. The community needs a proper legacy from the Exxon site. Is the First Minister now ready to tell them how he will fulfil the promise that his government made?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government has made clear that we will identify from the work that's going on in Grangemouth, which is generating, as we saw in the announcements last week, significant new jobs coming out of the investments that have been made at Grangemouth. I welcome the announcement made yesterday by INEOS and the United Kingdom Government about the investments we made at Grangemouth. And what the exercise that we've taken forward in Grangemouth has demonstrated is a range of different business possibilities that can lead to new employment, some of which we are now seeing happening and announced at Grangemouth. So that learning will be applied to Mossmoran to provide the vital support that is necessary for the workforce at Mossmoran, who I appreciate will be having an extremely anxious time as a consequence of the announcement that's been made by ExxonMobil. But let me reassure Mr Greer that the learning and the experience from Grangemouth is being applied in the industrial site in very similar circumstances at Mossmoran.
Ross Greer.
The First Minister says that the Government is going to learn from the experience at Grangemouth. That would have been absolutely fine months ago, but these workers are going to lose their jobs in a few weeks, and the Government has not come up with the plan that it said it would 18 months ago. Yesterday, Unite the Union said there have been a lot of kind words and soundbites from both the UK and Scottish governments, but the Union hasn't seen any real tangible evidence of any practical or financial support. Fossil fuel giants like Exxon are all too happy to profit from Scotland's resources and workers, but when the money runs out, they're out of here. We've seen this countless times before. Last time I asked this question, there was some confusion on the answer, but I'm hopeful that the First Minister can make a clear commitment today. Will his government finally commit to dedicated funding for Mossmoran and make it a condition of receiving that funding that any business must guarantee a job interview to workers who have lost their jobs at Mossmoran?
First Minister.
President Officer, I'm very much aware of the speculation that there was after the last answer I gave to Mr Greer, and I'm not quite sure how that speculation arose, because I thought I was crystal clear that the scheme and approach and condition we've put in place in Grangemouth, we will put in place in Mossmoran. So I hope that's clear, and I thought it was clear the last time I said it, but there it's clear now. And the business concepts that are emerging from the work at Grangemouth will be prioritised to be taken forward in Mossmoran. Obviously, ExxonMobil had extensive discussions with the United Kingdom Government about the future of the site that this Government was not cited on until the very last moment. So that was a limitation in our ability to engage substantively on these questions. But I hope that's given Mr Greer the clarity he was seeking, and the Government will engage in taking forward measures to support the workforce at Mossmoran, as Parliament would expect us to do.
Question number 4, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking to support households with the cost of living this winter.
First Minister.
So we know that people continue to struggle with the cost of bills and life's essentials, particularly during the winter, and this is particularly pressing at Christmas time. The Government is doing all it can to help within the powers that we have available to us. We will continue to allocate over £3 billion a year to policies which tackle poverty and help meet the cost of living crisis. This winter, we will invest over £196 million in our winter heating benefits, which provide vital support for low-income households, families with disabled children and young people and pensioners.
David Torrance.
I welcome the measures outlined by the First Minister, which are more necessary than ever, as Labour continually fails to deliver with the cost of living crisis. Scots were told by Stammer that their bills would fall by £300. Now they are rising by almost £200 and are set to increase again in January and April. This means households are left around £500 worse off than promised this Christmas. With the UK Government delivering nothing but rising bills and rising hardships, does the First Minister agree that it is only through independence that we can protect our living standards and cut household bills?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, members of the public can see what the United Kingdom delivers, and they were promised at the election a cut in their fuel bills, and their fuel bills are rising as a consequence. That is what the United Kingdom delivers to an energy-rich country. So the sooner Scotland's energy is under control of the people of Scotland, who can benefit from the energy potential of our country, the better, to reduce the cost that people are facing in relation to their domestic energy and commercial heating.
Question number 5. Tim Eagle.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the partial collapse of the Spey Viaduct, including what support it can offer to Murray Council in responding to the immediate consequences and the next steps for the local community.
First Minister.
President, so the collapse of the Speyside Viaduct is a sad loss. It has not only held significant heritage value, but it is a key feature for those using the National Cycle Network and travelling the Murray coastal route. The viaduct is, of course, owned by Murray Council, and it will ultimately be for the Council to lead on next steps. They will need some time to work through options, consulting and engaging with local communities as they do, but for our part, the Government is more than happy to be part of those discussions.
Tim Eagle.
First Minister for that response. I was told a story the other day of during the steam era, train guards running up and down the train trying to stop people leaning out because the hats kept falling into the salmon pools. Today, the Spey Viaduct is one of the most photographed structures in the area and has attracted admiration and comments from legends such as Timmy Mallet. Without making this about money or council politics at this point, I recognise that local people have been clear with me that they want to work constructively to see whether this could be fixed. So would the First Minister, or perhaps the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, who I'm sure is very familiar with this bridge, be willing to join me on site to meet the local businesses and the Scottish Dolphin Centre in the new year to discuss its future?
First Minister.
Well, I'm very familiar with this particular viaduct, and many details about it have been shared with me by my colleague Richard Lockhead in making the representations on behalf of his constituents, and I was discussing it with Mr Lockhead and his colleague Laura Mitchell just yesterday. So I welcome very much the local interest. I'm very happy for ministers to engage in dialogue about this question. It's an important structure, an important connection to ensure that members of the public can enjoy the magnificent outdoors of the Murray countryside.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. SEPA have repeatedly opposed local plans to manage the river, dredge the river, and what has happened is it's now cut into the bank, it's affected the golf course, it's affected houses and it's affected structures. So will the First Minister send a message to SEPA to tell them to stop meddling in issues like this, to stop prioritising flora and fauna over houses and infrastructure, and allow the management of these rivers that local people know best?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, SEPA have statutory responsibilities to exercise which have been placed on them by Parliament, and it's important that SEPA deploy those statutory responsibilities in a proportionate manner with the gathering of the appropriate evidence to inform their conclusions.
Question number 6, Monica Lennon.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the recent EIS findings that young people with additional support needs are being let down and teachers are experiencing stress due to inadequate resourcing, in light of the reported reduction of nearly 20% in specialist ASN staff since 2010, despite a rise of over 710% in the number of pupils requiring such support since 2007.
First Minister.
President, we are clear that all children and young people should receive the support they need to thrive in their education. Support comes from all staff, not only additional support needs specialists. As a direct result of investment from the Scottish Government, we've been able to increase the number of staff in our schools, and not just the number of teachers. Educational psychologists, family liaison workers and additional support needs staff have been supported through additional investments from the Scottish Government, which includes an additional £29 million this year, specifically to support the additional support needs workforce.
Monica Lennon.
I thank the First Minister for his response. However, we still don't know when the SNP will deliver on the additional 3,500 teachers promised in the 2021 manifesto, or the 4,310 additional teachers if we include the overall deficit in teachers since that promise was made. But none of this will reassure my 13-year-old constituent Adam, who has barely been in school since August. He is not thriving, First Minister, and no longer wants to attend school because his additional needs are not being met. Will the First Minister apologise to Adam and his family, who are now investigating homeschooling because they are desperate? And will he agree to meet with them in the new year to take steps to support Adam, but also to reassure the thousands of children and young people across Scotland who are being failed by this total system failure?
Always through the chair. First Minister.
I'm very sympathetic to the circumstances that Monica Lennon sets out to me. I represent constituents, I represent members of the public. I've represented many constituents over my years as a parliamentarian, trying to secure additional support needs provision for their children, because parents want to do the best for their children and to make sure the education system can meet their needs. That's why the government put in £29 million of additional investment in the budget. And I'm sorry to raise this on a sensitive issue, but Monica Lennon never voted for that. Monica Lennon sat on her hands.
Let's hear one another.
It's not good enough to come to Parliament and to demand this support and not be prepared to put the money in to expand the provision in our schools. That's the challenge that Monica Lennon faces today.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At the heart of many of the challenges facing our teachers around ASN is the inability now for parents to seek a diagnosis pathway for autism or ADHD. Families across Scotland, First Minister, are being failed, and SNP ministers seem to be more focused on meeting CAM's targets by removing our young people than actually giving them a diagnostic pathway. So can I ask the First Minister, will ministers now agree to review the changes they have made to CAM's pathways as part of the ASN review Scottish Conservatives secured from this government?
First Minister.
Well, President Officer, the CAM's targets have been met, and the government has taken steps to ensure that all of these decisions are made on a clinical basis by those who are empowered to take such decisions. And that's the basis upon which these assessments should be made, to ensure that the needs of children have been met appropriately within our public services and our education system.
Question number 7, Beatrice Wishart.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on local authorities which host renewable energy infrastructure receiving Scottish Crown Estate revenue allocations, such as a share of the income from ScotWind projects.
First Minister.
President Officer, it's my priority that as a country we generate prosperity and share it across Scotland for everyone to benefit from. I want a thriving, innovative, sustainable green economy, and the offshore wind industry is at the heart of this. It is driving investment and creating skilled, well-paid jobs. Scottish Crown Estate revenues allocated to local authorities for coastal community benefit. Since 2019, under this arrangement, over £78 million has been passed to local authorities, including £11.5 million for Shetland. We want to go further. Through our National Islands Plan, we are exploring opportunities for how the revenue from ScotWind projects and the wider Crown Estate can further support community infrastructure on islands.
Beatrice Wishart.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Shetland's got some of the highest energy bills in the UK, whilst renewable energy infrastructure now dominates the Isles. 103 onshore wind turbines, with more to come, proposals for substations and 38-metre pylons running across Shetland, offshore wind farm developments and subsea cables which will displace the vital fishing sector. And we're not getting much back. Community benefit needs to be meaningful. The Scottish Government's getting hundreds of millions of pounds from ScotWind, so will the First Minister commit to giving Shetland its share of the ScotWind leasing revenues?
First Minister.
Well, as I've indicated already, there's been resources invested in Shetland as a consequence of the Crown Estate revenues, and many of the issues that Beatrice Wishart raises are important issues which members of the public need to be persuaded by, that where they are supporting and accommodating the infrastructure, they are seeing the benefit of lower energy costs. I totally accept the situation in Shetland, where there is a very high generation of renewable energy, very high levels of fuel poverty and very high fuel bills. And that's the energy system of the United Kingdom. And that's the problem that we're wrestling with. We're wrestling with an energy market that does not ensure that the people of Scotland, including the people of Shetland, are getting the benefit of their energy wealth. And that's what my government is about securing for the people of Scotland.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. ScotWind is one of the most significant green investment opportunities of the just transition, with the potential to create thousands of high-quality jobs, strengthen our domestic supply chains and generate considerable public revenue. So can the First Minister further outline how the Scottish Government is ensuring that communities across Scotland, particularly in coastal and island areas, will see lasting economic and social benefits from Scotland while furthering our future energy security?
First Minister.
Our coastal regions are already eligible for community funds supporting education, infrastructure, environmental initiatives and revenue reinvestment. We know that ScotWind is a catalyst for careers in the green industries, offering training and capacity building in project management, engineering, manufacturing and maritime services, and we will always seek to ensure that benefits from ScotWind continue to be retained and invested locally within our communities.
Mercedes Villalba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the First Minister just said, Scotland is an energy-rich nation, so surely revenues from our natural resources should benefit us all. Yet the ScotWind auction round massively undervalued Scotland's offshore energy resources by setting a bid ceiling. Similar auctions held at the same time raised 20 to 40 times the amount per megawatt capacity than ScotWind did. So does the First Minister accept that setting a bid ceiling was a mistake? And what assurance can he offer my constituents in the North East that this mistake will not be repeated?
First Minister.
Well, what I would say to Mercedes Villalba is that she's not comparing like for like in the conditions of the projects that were taken forward in the different leasing rounds. That's the first point. Second point is that we've taken decisions that will enable the development of the supply chain with very significant economic opportunities for Scotland. But what we need the United Kingdom Government to do is to make sure grid connections will be delivered in a fashion that meets the needs of the industry in Scotland. And finally, I couldn't agree with Mercedes Villalba more that the energy wealth of Scotland should benefit the people of Scotland. That's why we need Scottish independence.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. Concise questions and responses will enable more members to put a question. I call Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government's announced £150,000 investment in each of the next 2 years into Cumnall Theatre, along with the £100,000 from Creative Scotland. Has been very welcomed in my constituency. Can the First Minister, first of all, join me in thanking everyone at Cumnall Theatre for the work they do, but also can he set out how he thinks this investment will help secure the theatre's future? First Minister.
I'm very delighted to do so. I know that Cumnall Theatre has been a very important facility within artistic venue within Cumbernauld for many years. It has new accommodation. I'm delighted that the Government has been able to put the resources in place to support that, and I'm grateful to Jamie Hepburn for the formidable representations that he's made on behalf of his constituents. In relation to the wider cultural sector in Scotland, a record total of 251 cultural organisations are receiving funding from this year. That's more than double the number of organisations that previously received core funding. So I think the cultural opportunities in Scotland are very significant, and I know that Cumbernauld Theatre will take the most advantage they can from the investment the Government has made to ensure that Cumbernauld Theatre continues to make a contribution to a thriving artistic and cultural sector in Scotland.
Richard Leonard.
Well, those conditions look unacceptable, completely unacceptable. The First Minister's words last year when shown footage of the overcrowded, unfit, unsafe living conditions of seasonal migrant workers on farms in Scotland. Then the First Minister promised to close the loopholes in legislation that leave these workers unprotected. And less than a month ago, the Housing Secretary told us, "We know there is a gap in protection. The Scottish Government will look to introduce a set of bespoke statutory accommodation standards." But yesterday, in response to a shocking new BBC Scotland report, the First Minister said the laws already exist and are regulated by local councils. When will the First Minister act? Use the powers which he has, use them before this Parliament ends, to address this national stain and to close this shameful loophole.
First Minister.
Well, I understand the strength of the point that Mr Leonard puts to me, and I engaged last Friday in my constituency capacity with an organisation that's making representations on behalf of seasonal migrant workers in my own constituency, and I understand the challenges and the issues that individuals face. I think it is wrong to say that there are no powers that can be used just now by local authorities. There are inspection responsibilities that local authorities can take forward. That's the point of the answer that I was giving to that particular question. And if there are further strengthening measures that can be taken to strengthen legislation, the Government will do so.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, at Aberdeen's home match against Kilmarnock at the weekend, alcohol sales were allowed as part of a successful trial. Now, alcohol is allowed at football for those lucky enough to afford hospitality. Sales are allowed at rugby matches and ice hockey games, but is banned for normal punters going to the local football match. So does the First Minister agree with me that the time is now right to look at ways at allowing controlled sale of alcohol at football grounds and end the discrimination against football fans?
First Minister.
Mr Lumsden is highlighting a particular pilot that's able to be taken forward within local licensing arrangements under certain conditions, and I understand that was taken forward in the case that Mr Lumsden raises. The Government has no plans to revisit this particular issue, but we will of course look with care at the outcome of the pilot that has been taken forward.
George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware that Christmas came early for Paisley Buddies on Sunday. What he may not be aware of is that St Mirren are now the first fan-owned club to win a major trophy, and not just in Scotland but in the United Kingdom. And at a time when our national game faces real challenges, does he agree with me that community-based fan ownership could be part of the solution? And will he join me in congratulating St Mirren's players, staff and supporters on their truly historic win? And as the only team that can now win the domestic treble, when can Stephen Robinson and his team expect to receive their invite to visit the First Minister at Bute House?
First Minister.
Let me express my unbridled joy to Mr Adam, who is experiencing unbridled joy at the success of St Mirren on winning the Premier Sports Cup with a magnificent performance at Hampden on Sunday. The point that Mr Adam makes, and I know he and his wife are devoted supporters of St Mirren, that the role and the approach of the fan-owned club, or the community-owned club, is a real strength for St Mirren. I'm sure it is a model that can be followed in other parts of the country, and given the success that St Mirren has attracted as a consequence, I'm sure it will be followed with interest in other parts of the country.
Finlay Carson.
To ask the First Minister what his response is to the immediate resignation of 3 leading environmental members from the Agriculture Reform Implementation Oversight Board and Policy Development Group, who cites systemic failures of process, a lack of transparency and a repeated disregard for evidence in the Scottish Government's approach to agriculture reform. How can the First Minister support a reform process so lacking in coherence, clarity and honesty that experts now say they no longer have any confidence in the Government's policy-making machine? Does John Swinney accept that this raises serious concerns that his SNP government is incapable of delivering the food security, climate or nature outcomes that Scotland desperately deserves?
First Minister.
Well, let me begin by saying that I express my thanks to those who have participated in the work of the ARIOB. It's been an important exercise in creating partnership working around difficult and sensitive judgments with competing interests and competing perspectives. The Government is absolutely committed to having a focus within our approach to agriculture on supporting the agricultural sector, on supporting the measures to tackle the nature crisis that we face, and to take measures on climate change. And the Rural Affairs Secretary will continue to give the leadership that she has given to this issue to try to bring parties together to find common ground in difficult and sensitive areas of policy.
Jackie Bailey.
The First Minister will be aware that health and social care partnerships across Scotland are reporting significant shortfalls in their budgets. In Argyll and Bute, there is a £6 million budget gap. The consequence of that is that in the last few days, I have a number of elderly constituents stuck in hospital, medically fit to leave, but unable to do so because their care package is simply not being funded. The First Minister knows that this will drive up delayed discharge and has a knock-on effect on on hospital capacity. What urgent action will he take to address this crisis in social care so my constituents can go home for Christmas?
First Minister.
Many of these issues were discussed yesterday at a meeting between ministers and COSLA to address the significant challenges that we face in relation to delayed discharge. Some of this is about the capacity that exists within local communities, the number of staff who are available. As Jackie Bailey will know, we have very low levels of unemployment in Scotland, significantly lower than the rest of the United Kingdom, and vacancies within social care in the provision of packages at local level. The Government obviously has a very keen interest in resolving this issue because it reduces pressure within our hospitals, which of course we've been experiencing acute challenges because of the rise in flu admissions to hospital, although thankfully that looks as if it is, the increase is slowing. But there is work going on within Government to work with local authorities to ensure that we have the support in place to meet the needs that Jackie Bailey has raised with me.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Whilst Royal Mail issued communications last week stating that Inverclyde was one of the areas affected by some postal issues, there was no mention of people waiting many weeks between deliveries. I've been inundated this week with constituents highlighting the problems that they're facing, including some constituents who have missed hospital appointments, including cancer patients, as a consequence of Royal Mail's failure. Can the First Minister ensure that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde engages with the Royal Mail to stress the seriousness of the issue and also to seek assurances about when the problem will be resolved?
First Minister.
I will take that issue forward. I know it will be a very urgent priority for NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to make sure that patients are able to be properly notified of any appointments, and if there are delays in relation to Royal Mail services, we will seek to address those directly with Royal Mail through the channels that Mr McMillan has suggested.
Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Statistics from Social Security Scotland published on Tuesday morning indicate a sustained decline of 19% in rejected applications for adult disability payment. This decline is worrying and means that ADP is now less generous, less supportive to disabled people than the benefit it was supposed to replace, PIP. Can the First Minister tell us if the sustained decline is a result of policy change, and if so, why has such a policy change been made, given the promises for ADP to be better than PIP?
First Minister.
Obviously, individual applications, well, every application has got to be considered on its merits, and the approach to that has been set out by ministers. The approach of Social Security Scotland is to operate within an approach of dignity, compassion and respect. Those are the founding values of Social Security Scotland, and those values will be applied to the application process that is taken forward.
Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Fishery processors in my constituency of Banffshire and Buchan Coast are under serious economic pressure due to quota cuts. There are fears that local jobs may be lost and businesses will suffer. Can the First Minister set out how the Scottish Government will help drive economic stability for the fisheries sector, especially in my constituency where livelihoods depend on it?
I would ask always that members contributing remotely have a camera on. First Minister.
President Officer, the Scottish Government values our fish processing sector and is committed to a sustainable and prosperous seafood industry. Due to exceptional fish quota cuts for mackerel, the Scottish Government will act, and today we have announced that fishing licences will change for 2026 so that Scottish vessels must land 70% mackerel and 70% herring into Scotland. This will take effect from the 1st of January 2026 and will help to protect jobs in our fish processing sector and wider supply chain during this challenging period, provide stability and position the sector well for when stocks recover. These measures will apply for 2026 and be kept under review.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions, and we'll momentarily move on to the next item of business.
Okay, if I could ask members leaving the chamber and those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we move on to the next item of business, which is portfolio questions. The portfolio on this occasion is social justice and housing. Any member wishing to ask a supplementary question should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant question. I call question number 1, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many affordable homes it anticipates will be built in North Ayrshire between 2025 and 2032 as part of its affordable housing supply programme.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
North Ayrshire's Council's current Strategic Housing Investment Plan, or SHIP, sets out a target to deliver 1,643 new affordable homes over the period of 2025 to 2030, supported through the Scottish Government's Affordable Home Supply Programme. Following recent additions to its programme, the Council has enhanced this target to 1,666 homes. The SHIP covers the period of 2025 to 2030, and the Council has not published an updated estimate extending delivery projections to 2032.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that helpful answer. Labour has slashed London's affordable housing target from 35% to 20% of new completions, with less than 4,000 new homes of all tenures built in January to June, despite a target of 88,000 a year. In Wales, the number of new home consents in Q2 this year is the lowest on record at only 28% of the 10-year quarterly average. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with Professor Janice Morfitt, University College London, who said this could have long-term implications for provision of affordable housing with a ripple effect around the country? And is she concerned that Labour's rolling back of its affordable housing ambitions could impact Scotland's funding?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Gibson for the question. I would say from the outset that robust targets for the provision of affordable housing are absolutely essential. It's worth looking back and seeing, between 1999 and 2007, an average of 5,448 affordable homes were delivered by Scottish Labour per annum, compared to this Government's record between 2007 and 2025, when an average of 7,734 affordable homes have been delivered per annum. And that's about an average of 40% more per head than that period when Labour were last in government. Indeed, in the last 4 years of the Labour-led government in Scotland, only 6 new council houses were built, compared to the last 4 years under this government, when 8,572 new council homes have been built.
A couple of brief supplementaries. First, Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And since we're talking about house building, let's look at the 2025 final house building statistics that were published this week. All sector new house building completions, down. Private sector new house building completions, down. Social sector new housing building completions, down. Affordable house building approvals, starts and completions, down. How confident is the Cabinet Secretary of completing 110,000 affordable homes by 2032? Or is it the case that the Government have just completely given up on this target? Because by the looks of it, they're not hitting their house building statistics.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.